I never imagined my own birthday would become the day my heart broke in front of everyone I loved. The living room was full of voices, laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warm smell of food I had spent days preparing. Balloons flew near the ceiling, and a large banner behind me read, "Happy 60th birthday, Mom," in bright blue letters. I stood there smiling, greeting guests, pretending I wasn't exhausted. Turning 60 felt heavy already, and I wanted this day to mean something. I wanted it to be a reminder that my life mattered, that the sacrifices I made as a mother were seen and appreciated. My son Daniel had insisted on throwing the party. He said I deserved it. Those words had filled my chest with a quiet pride I hadn't felt in years. Daniel was 35 now, successful, confident, the kind of man people admired. I used to look at him and think, this is what all those sleepless nights were for. I raised him alone after his father left when Daniel was just 8. I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, wore the same coat for 10 winters so he could have a new one. I never complained. Mothers don't, or at least that's what I believed. As the evening went on, Daniel tapped his glass with a spoon, smiling as everyone turned toward him. "All right, everyone," he said. "Let's say a few words for my mom." Applause filled the room. Someone handed him the microphone. My hands trembled slightly as I clasped them together, my eyes stinging with tears before he even started speaking. He talked about my cooking, my stubbornness, my habit of calling him 3 times a day. People laughed. I laughed too, even when some jokes felt sharper than necessary. Then his tone changed, his smile tightened. He looked around the room, then back at me. "You know," he said, "my mom has always been a lot." The laughter faded into uneasy silence. "She's always in everyone's business, always complaining, always making things about herself." I felt my throat close, but I told myself he was joking. He had to be joking. Then he raised his voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the room like glass. "Honestly, everyone's sick of you." The words hung in the air. No laughter, no gasps, just silence. I felt dozens of eyes turned toward me. My face burned. My ears rang. I wanted to disappear. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I saw memories flash in my mind. Daniel as a child with scraped knees. Daniel crying when his father left. Daniel smiling when I surprised him with a used bicycle I could barely afford. And now this. Someone whispered my name. I don't know who. My legs felt weak, but somehow I stood up. Without thinking, without planning, I walked toward Daniel and gently took the microphone from his hand. He looked confused, maybe even annoyed, as if I had interrupted something trivial. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I held the microphone, my hands steady now in a way they hadn't been for years. Something inside me had shifted. The embarrassment was still there, but beneath it was something stronger: clarity. I wasn't planning to speak. I said slowly, my voice calm but firm, "But since we're being honest tonight, I think it's time I say something too." Daniel opened his mouth, but I raised my hand slightly, and he stopped. "I know I can be a lot," I continued. "I know I worry too much. I know I call too often. But I want you all to understand something." I looked around the room at friends, relatives, neighbors, people who had shared my table, accepted my help, smiled politely at my presence. I became a lot because I had to be. I said, I became strong because no one else was going to be strong for my child, and became involved because if I wasn't, there was no one else. My eyes met Daniel's. He looked uncomfortable now, shifting his weight, avoiding my gaze. When Daniel's father left, I went on. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I worked until my hands ached and my back screamed. I skipped dreams so my son could have his. I skipped rest so he could feel safe. My voice cracked for just a second, but I didn't stop. And maybe that made me overprotective. Maybe it made me loud. Maybe it made me annoying. But it never made me careless. It never made me selfish. The room felt different now. People were listening, really listening. So if being a lot means loving too deeply, sacrificing too quietly, and showing up even when you're not wanted, I said, then yes, I am a lot. I handed the microphone back to Daniel and smiled. Not a bitter smile, but a peaceful one. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "Enjoy the cake." I walked to the kitchen, my heart pounding but my head held high. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt free. And I had no idea that this moment, that single sentence spoken into a microphone, was about to change my relationship with my son forever. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to. I pretended to be busy cutting the cake, arranging plates, anything to avoid looking at Daniel. My hands were steady, but inside, emotions were crashing into each other: pain, relief, anger, and a strange sense of calm. For the first time, I hadn't swallowed my feelings to keep the peace. I had spoken, and once spoken, there was no taking it back. Behind me, I could hear the party slowly come back to life. Conversations restarted in low, awkward tones. Someone laughed too loudly, trying to fill the silence I had left behind. I wondered what people were saying about me now. For years, that question had controlled my behavior. That night, for the first time, I didn't care. Daniel eventually walked into the kitchen. I didn't turn around. I knew it was him from the way the room changed, like the air had thickened. "Mom," he said quietly. I kept cutting the cake. "Plates are in the cabinet," I replied. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. "That wasn't fair," he said. I finally turned to face him. "Which part?" I asked. He frowned. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." A slow, tired smile crossed my face. "You embarrassed me first, on my birthday." He looked away. For a moment, he reminded me of the little boy who used to avoid eye contact when he knew he was wrong. But this wasn't a scrappy situation. This was something deeper, something that had been growing quietly between us for years. "You don't understand," he said. "People were laughing at first. It was just a joke." "A joke," I repeated. "Is that what it felt like to you when you said everyone was sick of me?" He didn't answer. "I want you to tell me something, Daniel," I continued softly. "When did I become a burden instead of a mother?" His shoulders tensed. "You're always there," he snapped. "Always calling, always checking, always questioning my decisions. I'm 5'5". I don't need a second conscience." Nodded slowly. "You're right. You don't. And maybe I stayed too long in that role because no one ever told me I could stop." He sighed, rubbing his face. "You don't get it. My friends, my colleagues, they think you're overwhelming." "Do you?" I asked. He hesitated, and that hesitation hurt more than his words earlier. Before either of us could say more, my sister Linda entered the kitchen. "The guests are asking for cake," she said gently, her eyes moving between us. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said quickly. "We're fine." Daniel stepped back. "I'll help serve," he muttered, and left without another word. As I carried the cake into the living room, people avoided my eyes. A few gave me sympathetic smiles. One older woman squeezed my hand and whispered, "You're stronger than you know." I thanked her, but part of me felt exhausted by strength. I had been strong my entire life. I didn't want to be strong anymore. I wanted peace. Later that night, after the guests left and the balloons began to sag, the house felt emptier than it ever had. Linda offered to stay, but I told her I wanted to be alone. I sat on the couch, still in my birthday dress, staring at the gift bags piled in the corner. 60 years old, and I felt like I was starting over. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "We need to talk. Not tonight, but soon." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "When you're ready to listen, I'm ready to talk." I went to bed that night and slept deeper than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because for once I hadn't betrayed myself. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Daniel didn't call. I didn't call either. Every instinct in me screamed to reach out, to smooth things over, to apologize, even though I wasn't sure what I would be apologizing for, but I resisted. I had spent decades teaching my son to stand on his own. Now I had to learn to stand on mine. A week later, Daniel showed up at my door unannounced. He looked tired, older. The confidence he wore so easily seemed cracked. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table where he used to do homework, where I used to pack his lunches, where I once stayed up all night waiting for him to come home as a teenager. Some places hold too many memories to be neutral. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, about what you said, about what I said." I waited. "I didn't realize how angry I was," he admitted. "Not at you exactly, at myself, at feeling like I never really grew up, Because you were always there to catch me. I nodded, and I didn't realize how lonely I had become trying not to lose you. He looked at me then, really looked at me. I didn't mean that everyone is sick of you, he said quietly. I was sick of feeling judged. But I shouldn't have said it that way, especially not like that. The apology wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the pain, but it was a start. I don't want to lose my son, I said, but I also don't want to lose myself trying to keep him. He swallowed hard. I don't want to lose you either. We sat there in silence, the kind that isn't empty but full of things still being figured out. I knew then that our relationship would never go back to what it was. And maybe that was okay, because sometimes love doesn't end when the truth is spoken. Sometimes that's when it finally begins. After Daniel left that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table long after the sound of his car faded. The apology echoed in my head, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Still, something inside me remained unsettled. An apology doesn't automatically heal years of unspoken resentment. It only opens the door. What happens after is the harder part. The following weeks were different. Daniel didn't disappear, but he didn't hover either. Our calls became less frequent, shorter, careful. We spoke like two people learning a new language together, afraid of mispronouncing something fragile. I noticed myself doing the same. I stopped asking certain questions. I paused before giving advice. It felt unnatural, like holding my breath underwater, but I kept trying. At the same time, something unexpected began to happen. With the silence Daniel left behind, space opened up in my life. At first, it felt like loss. Then slowly, it felt like possibility. I started walking in the mornings, just around the neighborhood at first. I noticed things I had ignored for years, the way sunlight hit the pavement, the sound of birds arguing in the trees, the quiet dignity of elderly couples walking hand in hand. One morning, a woman named Ruth struck up a conversation with me. She lived 3 streets over and walked every day to. We began walking together, sharing small pieces of our lives. She didn't know me as Daniel's mom, she just knew me as me. But one afternoon, I found an old box while cleaning the whole closet. Inside were notebooks filled with handwriting I barely recognized as my own, poems, short stories, dreams I had once written down when Daniel was small and asleep when the house was quiet and I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond survival. I sat on the floor and cried, not because those dreams were gone, but because I had forgotten they ever existed. That night, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I wrote, not for anyone else, not to impress, just to remember myself. Meanwhile, Daniel was struggling in his own way. I could hear it in his voice when we spoke. His confidence was still there, but it cracked more easily now. One evening, he admitted something he had never said before. I don't actually know who I am without you fixing things, he said. I didn't realize how much I leaned on you until you stepped back. I didn't rush to comfort him. That was the old instinct. Instead, I said, maybe that's something you get to figure out now. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, yeah, maybe it is. A month later, Daniel invited me to dinner at his apartment. Just the two of us. No audience, no jokes, no performances. When I arrived, he had cooked. It wasn't perfect. The chicken was a little dry, and the vegetables were overseasoned. I loved every bite. Halfway through the meal, he looked at me and said, I used to think independence meant pushing you away. He paused. Now I think it means choosing you without needing you to carry everything. Something loosened in my chest when he said that. I can love you without losing myself, I replied, and you can grow without rejecting me. He smiled, not the confident smile he wore for the world, but a softer one, the kind he used to have as a boy when he felt safe. That night, as I drove home, I realized something important. My son shouting into a microphone hadn't been the end of my dignity. It had been the beginning of my honesty. That moment had forced both of us to confront uncomfortable truths we had avoided for years. I was no longer living just to be needed. I was learning how to be whole, and Daniel was no longer just my son. He was becoming a man in front of my eyes. Not because I held on tighter, but because I finally learned how to let go. Life didn't transform overnight, but it did change in quiet, undeniable ways. I noticed it in how I woke up each morning without the tight knot of worry in my chest. in how I let the phone ring sometimes without rushing to answer, in how I no longer measured my worth by how indispensable I was to my son. There was a strange freedom in realizing that love didn't have to mean constant sacrifice. I joined a small writing group at the local community center. The first time I walked in, my hands shook just like they had when I held the microphone. At my birthday, old fears don't vanish easily, they wait. But I read one of my short pieces anyway. When I finished, there was a moment of silence and then applause. Not polite applause, real applause. I went home that night feeling seen in a way I hadn't felt in decades. Dino came to visit more often after that, but the visits felt lighter. We talked about books, about work, about the strange pressure of expectations neither of us had known how to escape. One evening, he admitted something that surprised me. I was scared, he said. Scared that if you stopped needing me, I wouldn't matter to you anymore. I reached across the table and took his hand. You don't have to earn your place in my life, I told him. You never did. He squeezed my hand, his eyes glistening. In that moment, I realized how much damage love can do when it's tangled with fear. A few weeks later, I received a call that shook me more than Daniel's words ever had. My doctor wanted to discuss some test results. Nothing urgent, she said. But those words are never comforting. I sat in the waiting room days later, watching other people stare at their phones. Their lives paused like mine. The diagnosis wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't nothing either. A condition that would require monitoring, lifestyle changes, awareness. Mortality has a way of sharpening perspective. As I drove home, one thought repeated in my mind: I don't have unlimited time to live half a life. That evening, I told Daniel everything. I didn't minimize it. I didn't dramatize it. I simply told the truth. He listened, really listened, without trying to take control or fix it. When I finished, he said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me." Trust, the word stayed with me. I don't want to be protected from life anymore, I said. I want to live it. He nodded. Then I'll walk beside you, not in front, not behind. That promise changed something between us. Months passed. My writing improved. My world expanded. I made friends who knew nothing about my sacrifices, my motherhood, my past. They knew me as a woman with opinions, humor, and a voice. And I discovered something else too. I liked myself. One evening, Daniel invited me to a work event. He introduced me to his colleagues, not as my overbearing mom, not as a joke, but with pride. "This is my mother," he said. "She's a writer." The word echoed inside me like a gift. Later that night, as I stood on my balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I thought about that birthday party again. About the humiliation, the pain, the silence that followed his words. I realized that moment hadn't broken me. It had stripped me down to what was real. And what was real was this: I was more than someone people tolerated. I was someone who deserved respect, including from my own child. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the future, because whatever came next, I knew I would face it as myself. The final lesson came quietly, the way the most important ones often do. There was no argument, no dramatic moment, no microphone, just an ordinary afternoon that felt heavier than it should have. Daniel called and asked if we could talk. His voice was steady, but I heard something underneath it: uncertainty. He came over an hour later, sat across from me, and took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position in another city," he said. "It's a big opportunity, a promotion, more responsibility." I waited. The old version of me would have already started listing concerns, asking questions, calculating distances. Instead, I waited. "Emy's moving," he continued, "far enough that I won't be able to come by often." There it was, the moment that once would have terrified me. "I want to take it," he said, "but I don't want you to feel abandoned." I looked at him, really looked at him. My son, no longer the boy who needed me to survive, but the man who needed my blessing to grow. "I raised you to live your life," I said softly, "not to stay small so I wouldn't feel lonely." His eyes filled with tears. "You're okay with this. I'm proud of you," I replied, and I meant it. We talked for hours that day, not about logistics, but about memories, about mistakes, about love that had been messy but real. Before he left, he hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that doesn't try to take, only to share. The weeks leading up to his move were bittersweet. We spent time together intentionally, no guilt, no tension, just presence. On his last night in town, he asked me something I never expected. "Will you read something you wrote?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. I read a piece about motherhood, about losing yourself and finding yourself again, about love that evolves instead of breaking. When I finished, he wiped his eyes. "I didn't know you like this," he said. "That's because I didn't know myself like this either," I replied. After he moved, the house was quieter than ever, but it wasn't empty. It was full of me, my mornings, my writing, my walks, my friends. We spoke regularly, not out of obligation, but because we wanted to. On my 61st birthday, I held a small gathering. No banner, no microphone, just a few people who knew me well. Daniel called and asked me to put him on speaker. "I want to say something," he said. I smiled. "Go ahead." "A year ago," he said, "I said something cruel and careless. I said everyone was sick of you. I was wrong." He paused. "The truth is, I was scared of how much you mattered. And I'm grateful you didn't shrink yourself to make me comfortable." Tears streamed down my face, but this time they didn't burn. "Thank you for teaching me how to love without control," he continued, "and how to be honest without cruelty." After the call ended, I looked around the room, at the life I had rebuilt piece by piece. I realized something profound. That night at my birthday party wasn't the moment I lost my son. It was the moment we both grew up. And as I blew out the candles, I made a wish I already knew had come true. I was no longer living to be needed. I was living to be whole.